So I'm sitting down here with Carlton Robinson. And Carlton, you are an active member here at Crosswalk Church. You're on our leadership team. You've lived here, 2 years now?
Almost 2 years come middle of this year, come June.
Yeah. One thing that we reached out middle of last year, probably July, August sometime, was to offer this conversational study group. What did we call it?
We called it a discussion group.
Discussion group.
It lasted about 4 weeks.
Okay.
We had 4 weeks of about an hour and a half sessions.
Yeah.
Where we had a small group engaging in a conversation about revolution fatigue.
One of the things I remember you saying, I was actually in revolution fatigue for the duration of it, and I'm so grateful for that opportunity. But I remember one of the things that you said. You were quoting Martin Luther King Jr. In his comment that the arc of history bends toward justice, and that struck me, and in the context that we see it, because I keep looking for the future to bend toward justice, and maybe I don't always see that, but your comment reflecting on that is about history and how that informs and affects. Could you say a little bit about how our history and our past informs today, and maybe the arc that bends in the future?
Well, Karen, that is one of my favorite quotes. I think it's hopeful, but yet it's also frustrating, because it talks about the hopeful and the positive future that we have. It acknowledges that God is sovereign and He's in control of all events. But that quote, that the arc of the moral universe is long, acknowledges the frustration and the challenge and the disappointment that we experience as we step and as we march toward justice. So that quote ties in with the title of our discussion group, Revolution Fatigue.
Yeah.
And that statement, that title, embodies the fact that in the DNA of our country, we're revolutionaries that believe in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But the reality of that DNA says that at the time our country's architecture was being established and the foundation was laid, the dream of our founders and our forefathers didn't include people of color and didn't include women in the dream that they had for this country. But the interesting thing is, just as today we see an impatience, a frustration with injustice, and while some are seeing this for the very first time, if you're a person of color, or if you were a part of a group that suffered from oppression in this country of America, as wonderful as it is with its opportunities, there is the reality that since the founding of our country, it's been an uphill climb and an uphill battle for us to be as inclusive as we should be in allowing everyone to participate in the American dream. So I thought it would be important, as we talked about the freshness of the brutality that we witness, some for the first time, to inform us of how these things can happen still in our country today.
Yeah.
And it's really a disease that's rooted in our founding that we're still working to eradicate. We've had wars and marches and fights legally and on the battlefield, and there has been progress made, but unfortunately we have these fissures that erupt or get live streamed so that more people can see it, and we realize that we still have work to do.
Yeah.
So the effort in our group discussion was to look back, see the roots of where we come from, that gives some perspective on how America can manage to be a wonderful land of opportunity, but yet have such a stronghold in areas of racism and even bigotry that continue, and how we can work together to try to eradicate those things from our system, even from our DNA, if you will, to have a new and better and a more perfect union, a more perfect America.
Yeah.
One of the ways we look at history, or one of the reasons why we look at history, is so we'll be cautious. Sometimes we think we've achieved victory in overcoming, only to see what we think we've banished and defeated morph into another form. I've been listening to what's happening with the coronavirus and the strains and the variants that are coming up and coming out now that can be even more damaging and destructive than the initial virus. And I think sometimes when our history of our country tells us that we've fought a good fight, people have been resilient and persistent and dedicated. There have been wars won. There's been legislation introduced and passed. There have been laws put in place. But yet we see that while people may have physical chains removed from them and slavery was ended, there was a 13th Amendment that called for that. But yet we saw the rise and the continued rise today of the disproportionate incarceration of people of color that find themselves, even for similar crimes and offenses, being more likely to be prosecuted, sentenced, and with longer sentences than people who are not of color. We've seen the doors open so that you can now send your children to schools of your choice. But if those schools aren't properly funded and supported, you still aren't getting a good education, even if you can live in a community where you choose. But you have to pay a higher interest rate on your loan because of your color, or it's more difficult to get lending. And the house that you purchase, when you look to refinance it or sell it, gets appraised lower than a similar home, the same home that people own who are not people of color. We see that racism and bigotry don't always get eradicated. They morph and they take on a new form. We've had the Voting Rights Act passed, which seemed to be a good thing. There was some consensus on that it was needed and necessary. But now we see efforts to limit people's ability to get out to vote. We see in some places it being more difficult to get to polling places. It's not an official poll tax, but it effectively reduces the opportunity for people of color in certain communities to have the opportunity to vote. So what history tells us is that we can't rest on our laurels of accomplishment. We need to be diligent and vigilant. We need to not only pray, but we need to watch. And we need to be ready to take action when necessary to make sure that the rights of people in our country are equally protected under the laws in our democracy that we have. And sometimes it's even necessary that the laws are changed because they have not always served everyone appropriately and everyone well. So those are things that we need to be cautious of as we seek to make change and as we watch to make sure that the changes that have been made are thorough and secure. Unfortunately, the reality is that perfect and complete change doesn't happen all at once, but it's a part of the struggle that continues. I'm thankful to be in the country that we live in, that has an architecture in place that allows this to happen. It's been a struggle over the years. It's not always, America has not always freely given full freedoms to all of its citizens.
Sure.
But I'm thankful to be in a country where we have the structure and the mechanisms in place where we can seek redress and change in an attempt to form a more perfect union.
Thank you so much, Carlton. I appreciate your insight and thoughtfulness, and just your continued commitment to not only to seeking justice, but to continuing to have patience and walk alongside those of us who are still learning and still seeking and still learning how to fight and learning how to do the next right thing. So thank you so much for your time today.
You are quite welcome. If we walk together on the journey, it'll go better for all of us.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Carlton.
You're welcome.